I'm going to go through the Pallas Sport Shoes problem and show how to use Desmos to choose the production rates for the high rise and the max risers. So you can see all of our production steps: stamping, upper finishing, insole stitching, molding, joining, and inspecting, and the amount of time that we have down here, and then how long it takes for each product. I'm going to use X for the high rise and Y for the max riser. Um, also, in this problem, we need to know how much we make for each one. So the high rise makes $18. The max riser makes $23. So I'm going to start out with that equation over in Desmos. 18x plus 23y equals z, and then I'll add in my slider. So the more money we want to make, the more we have to make of these products. Now I have no idea how many we're going to have to make or how big this is going to be, so I'm just going to start with 0 to 1,000 or 10,000 by 100s, and we'll probably change that later. But if we zoom out, we can see the farther we move Z, the more profit we want to make, the more of each product we have to make. And now I can start putting in my constraints. So I'll do one for each equation. The stamping 1.25. I'm just going to move that down just a little bit so I can see it. 1.25x plus 2y has to be less than or equal to the number of minutes one person works in a week. That's 420 minutes. And then because we can't do a negative number of minutes, I'm going to add in my other equations with the curly braces. X has to be greater than or equal to 0. Y has to be greater than or equal to 0. And just to make it easier, I'm going to copy those two groups because we'll be pasting that in for every one of the equations. So the next equation is the upper finishing 3.5x plus 3.75y less than or equal to 1,260, and restrict that domain. And we'll continue with the rest of the steps. So there's the situation that I have, the amount of time that I have. So I can take my Z slider, and the optimal solution will either be this point right here, this one right here, or this one right here, whichever one ends up being the farthest out on my Z axis. So I'll start sliding it out there. Looks like that one's not the biggest. That one at the bottom right is not the biggest. It looks like it's going to be right about there, somewhere around $5,500. So I'm going to change my slider here to go from 5,000 to 6,000 and make my step smaller. And let's see if we can zoom in on the area to get the best answer. And it looks like it's just a little bit lower than that. Let me change my step here to go by 5s. So it looks like the best answer is right around here at this point, where we're making about 195 of the first product and about 88 of the second product. So the last step for this part is just to zoom out until you can see the entire graph, and then take a screenshot showing what that optimal solution would be. All right, and then we'll move on to the second part of this. The company decides that they're not interested in making just one shoe. They would actually like to choose between 6 different kinds of shoes. So here's the information for all 6 of the shoes. We're going to take that information, and we can't solve that in Desmos because there's more than 2 products. So we'll take all of these, we'll put this in Google Sheets, and we'll solve that to find out how many of each of these kinds of shoes we should make. So here's my spreadsheet. I've taken all of the prices or the profit for each of the shoes and put that in my objective function. I've put all of the name of the different shoes. The decision values are just some random numbers that I chose. And then the time for each of the items is down here. So now all that's left is to finish column H and J and then solve it. So for column H, it's the same formula we've been using. We're going to use that sum product equals sum product parentheses, and we'll select the decision value row and the profit row that we're in. So if we made this number, we would make $226 in profit. And then we'll use that same formula for each of the constraints. Sum product, the number we're going to make, comma, the time. And then because I want this to be an absolute reference that always goes up to row 4, I'll put $signs in front of the 4s. Its suggestion this time would turn out right because I put in the $sign, but the autofill suggestions make me nervous, so I'd prefer just to fill it down myself. And then the last step is to put in the limits for each of these, the number, the amount of time we have for each of those products. So for that one, let's see, it's 420, 1,260, 840. I'm just going to put this over on the right side of my screen and make Chrome a little bit more narrow so I can see all those numbers. Right. So now we're ready to solve it and find out how many shoes, how many of each type of shoes the company should make. So we'll go to Add-ons, Open Solver, Open Sidebar. And my objective is to maximize money, so I'll update that here. All 6 shoes, we want to know how many to make, so those are my variables. And then for my constraints, the amount of time it would take to make them has to be less than or equal to the amount of time I have available. So I'll save that. And then I'll run the model and find out how many shoes I should make. What did I do wrong? That same error that we make a lot of times, I forgot to tell it to maximize my profit, not to minimize profit. Let's try again. So the maximum profit would be what's shown up here. But those numbers seemed kind of odd. They were actually rounded, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I can't make 89.82 shoes. I'm either going to inspect a shoe or not inspect it. So we're going to add one new type of constraint that we haven't used before, and that's the integer constraint. So I'm going to select all of these shoes, my decision values, And then I'm go to my type of constraint and change it to int. Int constraints mean use an integer, a whole number, and now if I solve the model, it'll come out with an answer that makes a lot more sense. And it figures out how to solve this the smartest way it can. And now I'm just going to change those, get rid of the decimals because I don't really need them. They don't really make sense. And I know how many of each type of shoe to make.